Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Front Office Football 9 tutorial series. In the first part of this series, we reviewed the preseason activities and what to do at the start of the game, some of the options that are available to dig deeper into. And in this episode, we're diving right into the regular season. The 2023 regular season for the Minnesota Vikings begins tomorrow, home game against Tampa Bay. We had cut our roster down to 53 players at the end of our last episode, and we've now decided on which 6 players are going to be inactive to get ourselves to the 47-man active roster that we will have for tomorrow. Right-clicking on players and turning them green toggles them active and inactive. So that's a little bit of a shortcut there to make it more simple to put players on the active roster rather than clicking through to their player card and then deactivating them that way. So we've decided on our 47 players who are going to be active. We did end up making Andrew Booth, the only guy on our team who has injury issues, inactive. He's questionable health at this point, suffered the injury in our final preseason game. The feeling is we've got pretty good cornerback room at this point. In a perfect world, I think we'd want Booth out there, likely instead of Najee Thompson or a Caleb Evans. But in this case, it is what it is. Still have 5 healthy cornerbacks. So we're going to try to get Booth rested and healthy and back to 100% as soon as is possible. And with our roster set and our active players picked, time to dig into our depth charts. This is another summary screen of the active roster. You can see the number of players that are required in each position group. If, for example, I were to take one of the starting quarterbacks, or in our case, our starting quarterback, Kirk Cousins, out of the starting lineup. You can see this will show up in red with the new rules this year. They did expand the active roster to 47 players, but you are required to have a third quarterback as that 47th player. So if something shows up in red on this screen, that will let you know that you're short a player in a certain position group as far as what you need to have a legal 47-man roster for the game. And now getting into the different position groups and the potential starters. Obviously, we're going to be starting Kirk Cousins over Nick Mullins and Jaren Hall. We're going to the recommendations from our coordinators as far as our offensive line and our kick and our punt returners, but to the extent there's a player that you want to play, you have that option to do that. The other thing you can do is lock a player on the chart, which would override coordinator recommendations. For example, if I wanted to play John LeGlue, the free agent who we signed a few weeks ago, think he's got some decent potential, but he's one of our worst offensive linemen right now. If we wanted to start him at right guard, and I was capable of dragging and dropping correctly, we could put LeGlue in there, and then just to show the example, we'll put Oli Uda in at right tackle. But if we really want to keep LeGlue there and override whatever our coordinators say, click this button right here. And then when we ask the coordinators for the depth chart, LeGlue will stay in that spot, even though he's not really the coordinator's recommendation. But Udo leaves the team for O'Neill, who is who they prefer. But as I said, I'm going to go with the coordinator recommendations here for just about everything. Skill positions, talked about this briefly last episode. When players are highlighted in red, they're involved in so many personnel packages that they could get tired. I do want to make sure that we don't abuse TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison too much. There are 5 receivers that we have, so it's going to not be too hard to find a replacement for Addison in a spot or two. Hawkinson is a little trickier. I had thought about moving Mr. Hawkinson out of one of the packages with 3 tight ends, perhaps the 2-2-1 personnel package, where we're probably more likely to be running. So I thought maybe we could give him a break, given that he's our top receiving tight end. The issue is, though, that Mr. Hawkinson is a pretty proficient run blocker, pass blocker, and he's got pretty good blocking strength. While the 2 other tight ends on our team, Josh Oliver is a brutal run blocker with almost no blocking strength, and Nick Muse is a little bit better, but certainly not at Hawkinson's level. So although we want Hawkinson on the field when we need him to catch as a tight end, also most situations where we're going to want a strong blocking tight end, we're going to want Hawkinson out there too. So finding the right personnel package to replace him in to ensure he doesn't get too tired is something I'm going to spend some time on now. And I was able to find a couple of packages to take Addison out to ensure that we won't be pushing him too hard. Hawkinson, since it's my first time through the game with this, I believe this is a new addition to the game from the previous version. I took him out of a couple of packages, but we've still got him in enough where it could tire him out a bit, given that he's so much better than the other tight ends on our team. I'm willing to do that at this point and also see if we see that his level of play suffers from where I'd expect it to be over time. But trying to experiment a little bit with the new game. Moving on to the defensive packages, similarly, we're going to ask the coordinators. Looks like the only guy who's potentially overworked at this point is the cornerback, Blackman, Mekhi Blackman. May look if there's a package where we can get him out. He's definitely one of the stronger cornerbacks on our team with that 51 current rating, 64 future rating, and very good at physical pass defense and playing his own, and pretty respectable at man-to-man also. Does have decent endurance, but not exceptional. So probably we'll look for a package to ensure that Blackman isn't in all of the time. But it could also just be something similar to what we're doing with Hawkinson, where he's one of our better players, and experiment with the game a little and see how much we potentially wear him down. If it turns out he's giving up a lot of big pass plays in the fourth quarter, we'll know that perhaps we've pushed him a little too far as his level of endurance versus the number of packages we're asking him to play in. And the last package for us to review is special teams. As I talked about in the last episode, I just don't want guys like Justin Jefferson, Harrison Smith playing. I think actually Hawkinson, not going to have him play on special teams as well. Some of our big stars, despite the fact that they've got really good special team skills, just a little worried about the risk of handful of extra plays, or depending on where the coach ends up wanting to use them between punts and kicks and returns and points after touchdowns and field goals, etc. It could be a dozen plus plays a game for some of these people, and don't want to take the risk of some of the most talented players on our team getting hurt on a special teams play. But that's obviously personal preference. So with our depth chart for this game, based on our starting lineup filled out at this point, next place to go is to the strategy settings. Talked about this briefly in the previous episode. Tons of things you can do as far as offensive game planning, defensive game planning, defensive analysis of how your lineup looks and what their skills look like in terms of run defense, rush technique, rush strength, pass cover abilities, physical cover and zone cover abilities. So this is kind of a nice summary of your front line, your linebackers, and your defensive backs and how they all kind of come together to build a team. Can analyze the base defense versus 3 wide receivers, and then look at your base defense versus 2 wide receivers when you're going to lose a back and replace him with a linebacker. And you can also see your various rankings here for how the team looks. Kind of a simple 3+ to 3- type of a rating system. For where the team kind of ranks and what quintile they think your team ranks in the various aspects: run defense, pass rush technique, pass rush strength, man-to-man coverage. So there's a lot to look at here in terms of your team in general and then your players in general. What I end up doing, and there are a couple other strategy screens, your defensive blitzing plan, and then last but not least, your broad game plan settings, maximum lengths of field goals you attend in a normal situation, end a game, when you go into a hurry-up offense, when you start draining the clock. Do you want your top corner always on the top wide receiver, or do you want your guys on various sides? Bunch of other different strategy settings here. There is a ton to get into, as I've talked about. I've also talked in previous episodes how I prefer the GM aspect of the game to the coaching aspect of the game. So what I end up doing is I have here on the game settings, I have the AI handle my playbook, and I have the AI handle my game plan. I still do the depth chart every day or every game and pick who's going to be active, who's going to not be active, kind of give the ingredients at least I take a view on, and then I let the coaches cook up those ingredients into the game plan and the playbook. And then I do handle all of the off-season GM functions and minor and major roster decisions myself. So if you uncheck these, digging deeply into these strategy screens becomes much more important. But for purposes of this brief tutorial, and honestly for purposes of 95% of the time that I'm playing the game, I kind of tweak what my coaches recommend, but generally default to their suggestions. And with our roster and our lineup and our strategy and our playbook all now set for week 1, we are ready to begin. As I mentioned, I sim through the games without playing them out. If you want to control your team's games, when you get to the schedule screen here, just click that button on and you have the opportunity to do that. I do not play in that level of depth typically, so I will pass on that. We'll look on the preview for our Bucks and Vikings game, and no statistics for anybody since it is game 1 of the year. Taking a look at the comparisons, though, as to which team is favored. Interesting that they would have, looks like they think that Tampa Bay has an advantage at quarterback with Baker Mayfield over Kirk Cousins. To me, that is a bit surprising. But we are ready to go. So we are going to, since we're not playing the game out, run to after the Tampa Bay game. And we are off to a 1-0 start, a 27-13 win for our Minnesota Vikings. Greg Joseph hit a field goal early. JJ with a pass from Cousins. Jalen Naylor with a pass from Cousins. And then in the end of the game, TJ Hawkinson with a 1-yard touchdown pass from Cousins. And then a 2-point conversion to Madison to give us a 14-point lead there at the end. So it looks like Hawkinson was at least useful late in the fourth quarter to come up with that touchdown, even though we were playing him a lot. All of the team stats you could possibly be interested in here. Tampa Bay's average drive started on their own 23, and they had a little over 23 minutes of possession. We were starting on our own 33 and had over 36 minutes of possession, so those numbers were clearly in our favor. Taking a look at some of the player stats, Cousins 28 for 43, only 230 yards, so he was dinking and dunking a bit, but still ended up with 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Madison with a solid game, and then Trey Sermon, who we had signed as a free agent, with a brilliant debut, 20 carries for 119 yards, popped along of 41 there. JJ, 5 catches, 45 yards, and the touchdown. Spread the ball out pretty well, although Jefferson was targeted 10 times. We had 4 guys who ended up with 4 or 5 catches, with Naylor, Jefferson, Hawkinson, and Osborne in that crew. So looks like a good opening day for our Minnesota Vikings. Taking a look at some of the defensive stats, any standouts in the game. Jeremy Hema, another free agent that we picked up, had 6 tackles, got a sack from Dean Lowry, and Jacqueline Roy and newcomer Von Miller each had half a sack. A couple of tackles for loss for Hema. You can see the number of plays each player played. So we had some guys who were in there almost all the time, some guys who play a little more often in pass protection, not surprisingly, cornerbacks and guys who rush the passer typically. And can also take a look at our blocking statistics. Brian O'Neill, the tackle, with a huge game, 5 key run blocks in 8 key run block attempts. Our center, Garrett Bradbury, was also pretty productive. Christian Darasaw had 1 pancake block for us. You can see 37 running plays for most of the guys, 4 of the 5 starters. But if you were looking carefully at our overview screen, you'll know that Christian Darasaw, the tackle, is out. So suffered an injury there. 41 weeks. So that is a serious one for him. His season is over. Deltoid tear, and his career may be in doubt. So certainly not the way that the first round pick of the Vikings back in 2021 starting tackle for us. Don't love the fact that he is gone for the season. And as those of you who are fans of football, or American football for those of you who might not be from the U.S., know, football is a pretty brutal game that leads to tons of injuries. And we've got a significant one here with our starting left tackle out for the year. You can see we had Hakeem Adeniji, backup left tackle, was actually not active. He'll certainly be active going forward, but we'll need to decide whether Adeniji becomes starting tackle, or do we move Brian O'Neill or Oli Uda over to the left tackle spot. You can see that O'Neill is a veteran who's almost as proficient at left tackle as he is at right tackle. Udo is somewhat a similar situation, although he's not as established at either position. And then Adeniji is better at left tackle than he is at right tackle, but I think the logical move for us is probably going to be to move the veteran Brian O'Neill to left tackle. So have some decisions to make already, but at least we're making them from a modest position of strength after winning game 1 of the season. And with Darasaw being out for 41 weeks, I don't see any reason to keep him off of injured reserve. So we are going to put Darasaw onto IR. Means he must sit out at least 8 weeks. We can only activate 2 players from the reserve list. Certainly don't expect him to be one of them. So we are going to put Darasaw on the injured list. And that will at least give us an opportunity to sign another player to the roster going forward to give ourselves a little more depth. Take a look at who is available on the free agent market at this point. Normally, when we're kind of playing through a season and playing for the long term, we'll take a more fulsome look before the season starts to see who's been cut as teams pare their rosters down to just 53 players. In this case, though, doesn't look like there's any huge stars out there. Does look like Walker Little, though, is one of the higher rated tackles out there. Take a look, and yeah, he's definitely the highest rated tackle out there, and he's only got 3 years of experience, so he's a little bit younger. Guy who can play both left and right tackle. I think we're going to need to make an offer to Mr. Little. And you'll notice that once you get into a season, this free agent screen is different than the one we had when it was still the preseason. Can only sign players to 1-year deals during the season, so they won't make a long-term commitment. See if we can save a little bit of money by giving him a slightly smaller signing bonus and a slightly smaller base salary than he was asking for. Says he's looking for a little more. Still wants a higher signing bonus. Not really going to save much money here, are we? No, so we'll give him the exact structure he wanted. He's only going to sign if we give him exactly what we wanted. We're trying to save a few bucks, which really isn't necessary with the amount of cap room that we have available right now. But I'm always looking to be as thrifty as possible. So we will sign Walker Little. Not sure whether he'll be in the lineup this coming week or not, but we have another tackle on the roster at this point to make up for the big loss that we've suffered in game 1. And as we get ready to figure out what our lineup is going to look like against the Philadelphia Eagles, we can see that we've got Walker Little on the team now. One of the things that is realistic about the game, you can see that he's got some seasonal rust at this point. He's a guy that we did just sign off of the free agent market. Not sure whether or not he was in camp with anybody or not. Probably not. Or if he was, probably wasn't getting a ton of playing time because he ended up getting cut. But it'll take him a little while and a little bit of playing time to shake off some of that rust, given that we just brought him on board. We are going to have Adeniji in, and I'm probably pronouncing some of these names wrong for those of you who are bigger fans of the Minnesota Vikings than I am. But we'll give him the opportunity to play this week since he is a natural left tackle, even though he won't be starting for us. But think that over time we'll probably be trying to get Walker Little into the lineup a little bit more frequently since on paper at least, he's one of the stronger blockers that we have with decent run blocking technique and okay pass blocking technique. And taking a look at the default lineup, the young left tackle Hakeem Adeniji, since he's the only player who's listed at a left tackle on our roster. Our coaching staff, perhaps somewhat unwisely, in my view, defaults to him being the starting left tackle. As I talked about earlier, Brian O'Neill is much more proficient at left tackle, even though it's not his best position. And given the importance of Kirk Cousins being successful to this team, achieving any expectations this year, we are going to force Brian O'Neill into the role to be our starting left tackle and then ask the coordinators for everything else. You can see that Udo is now the starting right tackle, and the youngster Adeniji, who was not even on the 47-man roster a week ago, is now going to be a backup for both of those players this week. And perhaps not surprisingly, our Vikings lost week 2 to the defending NFC champions on the road. 31-23 was the final score. Eagles jumped out to a 17-7 lead in the first half of the game, and although we outscored them in the second half, was a little bit too little too late. Cousins, another 3-touchdown game for him, but he's really dinking and dunking in our offense. 17 completions for just 148 yards. Still a pretty good passer rating with the 3-touchdown day. Not going to get too worried about the way we're running this offense yet, simply because Philadelphia has a pretty good defense. Next couple of weeks where we've got the Chargers and then at Carolina, probably going to be an opportunity for Cousins to hopefully develop a bit better connection with Justin Jefferson, who only had 2 catches on 3 targets today, and start putting up some of the type of numbers that we're expecting from our franchise quarterback and what could be his final season with the Minnesota Vikings. And the injuries are, as you would expect, starting to build up. Booth still questionable. Darisaw obviously out for the year, as he has been since last week. And now both Ezra Cleveland and Von Miller are doubtful for next week's game. So the depth of our roster and the quality of some of our bench players is being tested here early in this 2023 season. And good news, we won week 3 against the Chargers, 24-23. Seems like a very Los Angeles Chargery way to lose a game. TJ Hawkinson caught a touchdown from Cousins, and then in the fourth quarter to give us the go-ahead score, Nick Muse, another tight end, 6-yard pass from Cousins. Taking a look at the offensive stats, a little more downfield throwing by Cousins in this game, 19 of 25 for 241 yards. Did throw his first interception of the season, but 8 touchdowns and 1 pick through 3 games will certainly take. A big day for him. Still seem to be having some trouble targeting Justin Jefferson, which is not ideal. I'm sure he's probably being doubled pretty aggressively, but at least through the early stages of this game, certainly could make an argument that we'd expect him to be putting up better statistics than he has thus far. Seems like did a decent job getting some turnovers. Looks like we had 2 interceptions of Justin Herbert. He did hit Mike Williams for a couple of touchdowns. But the turnover battle looks like it was in our favor. We did have the 2 interceptions. We did have 1 fumble, 2 interceptions that we made as opposed to the 1 interception that the Chargers picked up off of us. But offensively, we just had 1 fumble from Madison, and you can see 5 fumbles from the Chargers today. Herbert, Eckler, Everett, Williams, and Quentin Johnson. So that certainly worked in our favor because it looks like we recovered all of those fumbles. So a lot of turnovers from the Chargers, and it means that our Vikings are now 2-1 as we get ready for a road game against Carolina that I think we should be favored in. And unfortunately, the injury situation continues to get more challenging for us. Harrison Phillips now out, along with Jeremy Hema, along with the crew that was injured last week as well. Booth is now probable, so we can probably start thinking about getting him back into the starting lineup, which will help, or not necessarily the starting lineup, but getting him back onto the active roster, which should help the back end of our secondary when we need to go into nickel and particularly dime packages. It'd be nice to have him around. But the thing about this game is that it does generally require pretty dynamic roster management, in my view, because the injuries add up and they add up quickly. And unfortunately, Week 4 was an ugly performance, 42-19 loss to the Panthers. So I was wrong about us being able to take advantage of them. Looks like Bryce Young is a much more effective player in the early stages of his career in this simulation than he has been through the early weeks of the regular season in the NFL this year. 19 of 24, 223 yards, 4 touchdowns, and no picks for Bryce Young. Cousins, no touchdown passes, and he did throw a pick 6 today. Did complete 21 of 33 for 282 yards, but the turnover battle that was favorable for us last weekend against the Chargers was even this year, as the Dante Jackson did have a fumble for Carolina. Must have been off of a turnover of some sort, unless he's he could be a punt returner or a kick returner. So I'm guessing that's probably what happened. Let's look at his return statistics. Yeah, he's a punt returner for them, so he probably fumbled a punt away to us. And we do have the opportunity to kind of go in and see the drive charts and information as far as the flow of the game, who's got the ball, when they're driving, the kind of big key turnaround points in terms of win probabilities that dramatically moved the game in one direction or another. Can also go play by play if you are interested in following things incredibly closely, and then can also replay the game in a somewhat primitive looking version of the football world here. Not something that I've spent a ton of time on in my years playing the game, in my week at this point poking around in OOTP, or not OOTP, Front Office Football 9, but a lot of options to get as much information on the statistics and how the game is going as you could possibly desire. I'm going to sim through the next few weeks more quickly to close in on the trade deadline, find out exactly what our team looks like, and we'll check in again at that point and let you know how the Vikings are doing. And the season is starting to get away from our Minnesota Vikings. We've lost 3 in a row to fall to 2-4. Most importantly, Kirk Cousins is now questionable. Not going to be full strength for about 6 weeks at this point. So we've thought about, do we want to just throw in the towel on this season? And the answer is no. But did investigate the trade market a little bit for Mr. Cousins. And unfortunately, there's not much of a market for Mr. Cousins. Did remind myself, or not really remind myself, but I knew there was a way to shop players in previous versions rather than doing the one-for-one thing I was doing in the previous episode, and just kind of needed to look at the middle of the screen here and see. Can drop here to shop a player, and it will show you if anyone is interested. And unfortunately, with the money that Kirk Cousins is making, no one is interested in trading for him right now. Just to show you how this does work, put a player like Justin Jefferson in there, and interesting that no one is interested in him either. KJ Osborne, no interest. There's got to be somebody on this team that someone would trade for. How about Hawk? Kind of interesting. There we go. Finally somebody. Ty Chandler, a young running back. And you can see that there is a lot of interest. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to offer something staggering for him. And certainly at this point, a lot of teams, I think at the start of the game, are in somewhat difficult salary cap situations, which will make it challenging. Take a look and see what we can get in terms of an offer for Mr. Chandler. So we know that there's a bunch of teams interested in him. Baltimore, one of the ones who's very interested in him. And they'd offer us a fourth, a fifth, and a seventh. A fourth and a seventh, and we have to give them Ty Chandler in a fifth. Just take a look at some of the other options that are out there. I'm guessing they'll be broadly similar. But Carolina, yep, similar. Ty Chandler in a fifth for a fourth and a seventh. Jacksonville also interested. Ty Chandler in a fifth for a fourth and a seventh. So it seems like there's some pretty consistent thinking among the teams as what an appropriate offer is for Ty Chandler. So probably not someone that we're going to look to move on, although it would give us a little more of draft capital. But with the injury situation getting more and more significant each week, and the Vikings reeling at 2-4, going to have to make some progress against San Francisco and Green Bay. Probably need to win at least one of those games. I'd say we want to win 2 to get back to 500, but realistically not sure if we're going to be able to beat the 49ers, even though we're at home. But hopefully we can go on the road and beat the Packers before the trade deadline, and we have to start making some decisions about whether we want to try to extract any value from the few players on our team where there might be some interest around the league. And things kind of went as expected. We lost a fourth straight to San Francisco before we did go on the road and edge the Packers. Still have several games the whole month of November, actually, until we get to our bye week. So we're going to explore the trade market. If we can get rid of someone who's in the final year of their contract and not a particularly important player for us and get something interesting back in return, would certainly think about doing it. But as we've talked about, the injuries are adding up. Von Miller is probable at this point, which is positive, but Justin Jefferson questionable now. Cousins is probable for next week, so we could have him back. But JJ, who's been having disappointing season given his skill level. 35 catches for 490 yards almost halfway through the season is not what we expect from Justin Jefferson. And one thing about the game, you can see he's only started 6 games. The way that the starting players works, I believe, in this game, and if someone knows differently, they can correct me if I am wrong, but I believe it's kind of like the first play, whatever package you use, kind of determines who the starters are. So that's why it's kind of a weird situation with Jefferson having only started 6 out of 8 games, because clearly he is normally in our lineup in almost all circumstances. And when we've been looking at the roster page in the past, we've typically been looking at this basic information page, but there are a lot of other different views that you can look at. The injury report is very useful when you're trying to figure out who your 47 active players are going to be. A good summary of what type of injury designation people have, what they're dealing with, and their potential capacity as you try to make some roster decisions. And as we get closer to the trade deadline, the contract page is an important one too. You can see how long you've got players signed through. The guys whose contract is going to, players whose contracts are going to end in the beginning of 2024, which, as you can see, is about probably close to 20 players on our team are on the final year of their contract, would be the ones who would be most simple for us to potentially try to trade away, since we could be losing them anyways. You can also see the cap cost for the various players, how much you would save against the cap if those players are released. So a lot of good information on these pages. I'd say the contracts and the injuries are the ones that I use the most. Personality, see who your captains are, Kirk Cousins and Danielle Hunter. You can see if there's any players with some attitude issues. You can see here Braxton Morlando, concerned about his attitude. Danielle Hunter is a mentor. Should be somewhere to see that here. Yeah, he's a mentor to our outside linebackers. So as you can see from the, if I click on it properly, mentors help young players develop to their true potential. So useful to have some mentors on the team when and if possible. Not a ton of them on the team right now. As we mentioned, Braxton Morlando, little concerned about his attitude. He's disgruntled. Would be good if we knew why he is disgruntled, because he's a guy we brought over, and could be that he's not really getting a lot of action out of the backfield. He is our starting fullback, although, again, he's only started 2 games, since typically we're not running formations with fullbacks the first play of the game, but hasn't touched the ball in terms of rushing, and he hasn't caught any receptions either this year, so he may be a little, or actually that's just his rushing stats. His receiving stats, he has caught 5 balls for 30 yards. So he's probably not thrilled with the amount of usage that he's been getting at this point, but it is what it is. Suck it up, Braxton. And it really doesn't seem like there was too much to do at the trade deadline. We did end up trading the reserve running back Ty Chandler and a 5th rounder to Chicago for a 4th and a 7th. Wasn't a guy who was doing much of anything for us, pretty much a replacement level player that they were interested in. So at least we've got a little bit extra late round draft capital next year for when we get to the draft, which will be an interesting experience, and probably will end up doing a tutorial just on the draft alone in a few episodes once we've simmed ahead to that point. So not expecting the rest of this regular season to be particularly exciting for Minnesota. Would love it if maybe we can win 3 of the next 4 and put ourselves in a position where we're at least 500 before the bye and competing for a playoff spot, but certainly no guarantees that that's going to happen. And unfortunately, we split our 4 games, lost at Atlanta and at Denver. We won our home games against New Orleans and the Bears. Hopefully Cousins will be back after the bye week and we can go on a run over the last 5 games of the season. He's definitely not been playing regularly in recent weeks. You can see at this point, Jaron Hall's thrown for almost as many yards as Cousins has this year and is actually ahead of him in touchdowns at this point. So after the really nice start to the season, Cousins has been very banged up. Detroit at 9-2 is running away with the NFC North at this point. At 5-7, we are certainly on the periphery of the playoff hunt. You look, though, the Giants at 5-7 are a wild card team in the NFC. So at this point, looks like one really bad team is going to get into the playoffs. Philadelphia at 9-2, Detroit at 9-2, and San Francisco at 8-3 are the three dominant teams in the NFC. And then there's a lot of mediocrity behind that. Looks like at 5-6, Atlanta is leading the NFC South despite having a losing record. No surprise to see Kansas City and Cincinnati at 9-2, Buffalo at 9-3. Indy at 10-1 is the surprise, and the reason why is that Anthony Richardson is having an absolutely dynamic rookie season in this game, completing over 70% of his passes, has thrown for 21 touchdown passes, and when we look at his rushing statistics, he's added a couple other rushing touchdowns and picking up almost 5 yards a carry on the season. So a brilliant mythical season or fictional season for Anthony Richardson here in 2023. Probably need to go 4-1 down the stretch to ensure a wild card appearance. I guess there is a chance if we went 3-2, the tiebreaker could work in our way, but it does seem like if we could get to 9 wins and have a winning record when all is said and done, 9-8 very well could earn the third wild card spot in the NFC this year. And the good news coming out of our bye is that our injured list is the smallest it's been since the early weeks of the season. Darasaw obviously still out for the year. Hema and our punter Ryan Wright are both probable, so and everybody else is healthy. So the bye came at a good time. Las Vegas, Cincinnati, Detroit, Green Bay, and Detroit doesn't sound like a easy finish to the season. At Cincinnati and at Detroit in particular are probably going to be very tough games to win. So getting to 4-1 down the stretch is going to be a challenge, but that certainly needs to be our target. As I said, I think if we get to 9 wins, probably do get a wild card with this team. And we had been on a decent run. We lost at Cincinnati, which we expected, but we won on the road at Vegas in a big way, and then we beat Detroit at home, even though they're the best team in the division. Unfortunately, we just lost at home to the Packers, so that puts us at 7-9. So 8-9 is the best that we can hope for right now. Arizona at 7-8-1 is in the wild card. The Giants at 8-8 are in a wild card. So we've got a chance. I think mathematically, not a great chance, but we've got a 17 or 18% chance of the playoffs here. So it looks like if we win that game we need to win that game against Chicago, obviously. But if we don't win that game, there's no hope. But hopefully this final game of the season, we can do the job against, it's at Detroit. What was I looking at there? That was weird. I thought it said... Yeah, it says our next game is Chicago. I don't know why it says that, because our next game is at Detroit. So who knows what these probabilities really mean, because doesn't even have our next game right, which is a little bit weird. Probably just one of those quirks that hopefully will be cleaned up. And unfortunately, we lost the final game of the year at Detroit, 34-23. So the record for Minnesota, 7-10, tied for second in the division with Green Bay. Cousins ended up coming back the second half of the year, ended up throwing for over 3,000 yards despite the injuries that kept him out of several games. Completed 64% of his passes, 23 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, and a 93.4 quarterback rating. So certainly wasn't a vintage season for Mr. Cousins, but some of that likely has to do with the injuries. Trey Sermon led the team with 741 rushing yards. JJ ended up leading the team on receiving yards, but only 961. So certainly an off year for him. He did miss a game. 74 catches for 961 yards and 4 touchdowns is certainly not a vintage JJ season. Cameron Bynum led the team with 123 tackles. Dean Lowry with 8 sacks, and Harrison Smith had 4 interceptions. Some of the highlights. You can see our offense was pretty good. We were 10th in the league in points scored. Unfortunately, we're 29th in the league in points allowed. So the defense overall was disappointing. Pretty middling passing attack for us, pretty middling rushing attack. Did not allow very many sacks, but we also didn't sack our opponents very much. And our turnover margin of -4 was one of the weaker numbers in the league, ranking 24th in the 32-team National Football League, where they play for pay. We'll take a look at some of the statistical leaders for the season here. Jared Goff, despite playing only 9 games, had a slightly higher passer rating than Dak Prescott. But Prescott had a big-time season, led the league with over 5,000 yards. Joe Burrow also joined him in the 5,000-yard club. C.J. Stroud, the rookie, with over 4,700 yards. Looking at touchdown passes, Prescott and Burrow tied with 42. Jimmy G with 40 as well. Looking at the quarterback rating, I'd say a bit of a surprise that Patrick Mahomes, 105.8 quarterback rating is certainly very good, but wouldn't expect to see him behind Mitch Trubisky, who ended up taking over when there was an injury in Pittsburgh. Teddy Bridgewater also played well in Detroit when Goff was banged up. Look at some of the lower-rated passers: Sam Howell, Mac Jones, Sean Clifford, C.J. Stroud. Despite the massive numbers he threw for, did not have a great QB rating in this game. Did throw 30 touchdowns, but 23 picks. Rough year for Baker Mayfield, and Aaron Rodgers, a bit disappointing for the Jets, barely completing 60% of his passes, and 80.7 passer rating, which I'm sure is the lowest of his career. Looking at the rushing leaders, Bijan Robinson, the rookie from Atlanta. I'm sure Atlanta Falcons fans and those who have Bijan Robinson on their fantasy teams this year are wishing that Arthur Smith would use Bijan Robinson in that kind of way. Taking a look at the receiving leaders, and got a 2,000-yard season this year, which I know is something that has been talked about, is Tyreek Hill and A.J. Brown as guys who have been talked as possibly being able to hit that number this year. Michael Gallup did it here, and Allen Robinson for Pittsburgh has a huge season as well. there are some of the big names that you would expect to see among the receiving leaders: Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Adams, Deebo Samuel, T. Higgins, Mike Williams, A.J. Brown, Mike Evans. A lot of familiar names there, but definitely some surprising names too. Zay Jones had a monster season, kind of out of nowhere for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So, and then Noah Brown with Houston, with Stroud throwing the ball all over the field, had a monster season. So, interesting statistics. Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, some of the guys who did not have as big seasons this year as you might expect that they would in the real world. Taking a look at some of the defensive statistics, Zaire Franklin of Indianapolis led the league in tackles. Kenny Clark of the Green Bay Packers with 21 sacks. Drake Jackson, Max Crosby, DeMarcus Walker, and the Bosa brothers also with some pretty big sack years as well. So interesting season. Taking a look at the overall standings, Buffalo a division winner in the AFC East. The Jets did get to a winning record but missed the playoffs again. Cincinnati and Cleveland, playoff teams out of the AFC North. Indy and Jacksonville, playoff teams out of the AFC South. And then Kansas City and the Las Vegas Raiders, your playoff teams in the AFC West. In the NFC, Philly, the Giants, and Dallas all in the playoffs, same as happened a year ago. Detroit wins the North. Atlanta wins the South and salvages a winning record. And San Francisco and the Arizona Cardinals at 7-9-1 in the playoffs. So if we had won that final game of the year and gotten to 8-9, we would have snuck into the playoffs. So just missed this year, unfortunately. We'll find out who is going to win the front office bowl, and then we'll call it an episode. In our next episodes of this tutorial series, going to start getting into some real interesting stuff in the off season, or at least interesting to me who enjoys that GM aspect of the game. And although there were some upsets in the playoffs, the Giants for a second consecutive year took out a somewhat heavily favored team in a wild card game, and the Raiders shocked their division rival Kansas City Chiefs in a wild card game in the AFC. But by the time we got to the conference championship games, it was the favored teams. The one-seeded Bengals lost to the two-seeded Bills in the AFC, and the first-seeded Eagles took out the second-seeded Lions in the NFC, and the Eagles crushed the Bills 49-24 in the Super Bowl here for the 2023 season. So the year is over, and as I said, in our next episode, we're going to start digging into some of the off-season activities in this game, which hopefully will be interesting and a learning experience for me and a learning experience for those of you who are watching. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.